The phone vibrated at 2:17 in the morning, and the sound felt far too loud for such a small apartment. Sarah Miller woke up startled, her heart beating out of rhythm, as if someone had knocked on her door at that impossible hour. The cold light of the screen cut through the simple room, illuminating neatly folded clothes, a forgotten cup on the table, an entire life contained within a few square meters. The open message had no emoji, no greeting, no context at all. It was just a raw outpouring, almost painful to read. It said he was tired of pretending, tired of smiling at people who didn't know him, tired of living a story built on silence and convenience. It said that night had been the limit, that the lie had passed the point of no return, that someone needed to know the truth before he lost himself completely. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest that made no sense. That message wasn't meant for her, yet every word seemed to touch exactly the wounds she had been hiding since her last failed relationship, since the last time she believed she might be chosen. She reread it slowly, feeling her eyes burn, wondering who that person on the other side of the screen was, and why someone with such urgency was speaking into the void. On the other side of the United States, in a sophisticated hotel room overlooking Manhattan, Daniel Walker stared at his phone as if it had just betrayed him. The wrong name on the screen, the confirmed delivery, the immediate realization that he had just handed his most dangerous truth to a complete stranger. Rain pounded hard against the hotel window as he ran a hand over his face, trying to decide whether to delete everything or accept the mistake as a sign he hadn't asked for, but might need. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling something stir inside her, something between fear and curiosity, as the silence between one message and the next grew heavy. Neither of them knew it yet, but in that exact moment, two lives that should never have touched had just veered off their expected paths, pushed by a message sent by mistake that didn't ask for attention, but demanded consequence. Sarah spent several minutes staring at the dark screen, feeling the weight of that wrong message spread through her body like a restlessness with nowhere to settle. She could simply ignore it, delete it, go on with her life as she had so many other times when something promised too much and delivered too little. Still, there was a strange urgency there, as if someone had cried out for help in an empty room and she was the only one who heard it. Carefully, she typed that the message had reached the wrong person, adding that it seemed far too important to go unanswered. As soon as she sent it, she regretted it. The silence that followed was brief, but intense enough to make her feel she had crossed an invisible line. The reply came tense, almost desperate. He apologized, said he had made a serious mistake, begged her to delete everything and pretend nothing had happened. Sarah felt her heart race. There was fear in his words, but also a contained relief, as if he were torn between disappearing and finally being heard. The messages that followed came at a measured, cautious pace, like footsteps on thin ice. He avoided any personal details, spoke vaguely about wrong choices, about living a life that didn't feel like his own. She replied with unexpected honesty, talking about loneliness, about feeling invisible, about how sometimes a mistake is the only thing capable of interrupting the routine of silence. The conversation stretched deep into the night, creating an improbable intimacy between two strangers who had never exchanged a glance. Sarah didn't know who he was or where he was writing from, but she felt he carried a secret too large to fit into short messages. At one point, he typed that there was something about him he couldn't reveal, something that would completely change the way she saw him. He said that if she knew, she might never reply again. Those words lingered on the screen, heavy with tension. Sarah took a deep breath, sensing that this choice was not a small one. When she finally typed "continue," the world seemed to hold its breath with her, because that simple gesture had just opened a door that could never be closed again. From that early morning on, Sarah's days began to carry a constant hum, as if something were out of place even when everything looked the same. She kept waking up early in the small apartment in Ohio, making the strong coffee that helped chase away exhaustion and putting on the simple uniform of the supermarket where she had worked for years. Between cold aisles and shelves always arranged by other hands, Sarah learned daily to be noticed only when someone needed help. Customers rarely remembered her name, managers spoke to her while checking the time, and life seemed to have grown accustomed to placing her in the background. Still, there was dignity in her gestures, a quiet resistance in continuing to be kind even when no one noticed. Daniel appeared on the other side of the screen as an almost absurd contrast. While she wrote during short breaks at work, he replied from places she only knew through pictures. Airports, hotels, rooms that felt too silent. Even so, he avoided any detail that might reveal him. He spoke more about what he felt than about what he did. He talked about a suffocating routine, about people who approached him with calculated intentions, about decisions that always had to be made with image in mind, never desire. Sarah read it all with curiosity and caution, trying to fit that man into a possible reality, without imagining the size of the world he was hiding. Sarah's loneliness hadn't been born from sudden abandonment, but from a sequence of small frustrations accumulated over the years. A marriage that ended without scandal, only indifference. Dreams postponed until they became habits. The persistent feeling that life had been something that happened around her, never inside her. Talking to Daniel was different because it demanded no performance. She could be honest without fear of disappointing, and that created a space where simple words carried weight. He, in turn, found in that exchange something money, status, and control had never been able to buy: the chance to be heard without being analyzed. The conversations began to fill late nights and early mornings, crossing time zones and opposite routines. Daniel asked about small details as if each answer were an anchor. Sarah spoke of simple memories, empty afternoons, of how silence could sometimes be deafening. Gradually, she noticed that he always deflected when the subject drifted too close to real life. He didn't talk about family, didn't talk about friends, never mentioned a fixed place. It stirred suspicion but also empathy. There was pain there, and she recognized the language of someone who lived hiding parts of himself. Without realizing it, Sarah began to wait for the messages as one waits for a sign that the day had been worth it. Daniel, on the other side, started measuring the real world by the interval between one reply and the next. Both knew that their connection had been born from a mistake, but they felt that perhaps mistakes existed precisely to reveal truths that an overly organized life insisted on silencing. And as intimacy grew, the secret he carried remained intact, pressing against time, waiting for the inevitable moment when everything would stop being just words on a screen. The conflict didn't arrive like an explosion, but as a slow, silent erosion that seeped into both of their routines until it became impossible to ignore. For Sarah, the feeling of being invisible took on sharper edges precisely because, on the other side of the screen, someone truly saw her. At the supermarket, a new manager began treating her with open impatience, correcting her in front of co-workers, assigning her mistakes that weren't hers as if she were easily replaceable. Each look of disdain cut deeper because, at night, Daniel asked how her day had been, listened to every detail, validated feelings that no one before had considered worthy of attention. The contrast between those two worlds began to hurt. Daniel felt the tension growing too, but from a different place. His real life demanded constant presence, quick decisions, strategic smiles. Meetings grew longer, eyes more alert to any sign of weakness. People close to him began to notice that something distracted him, that he seemed less available, less controlled. The woman with whom he maintained a discreet relationship began to demand more, pressing for clarity, space, public recognition. The silent agreement that had always worked started to crack, and Daniel found himself pressured from all sides. Each message exchanged with Sarah became a greater risk, because he could no longer sustain two versions of himself. The shock came on a night Sarah would never forget. Invited by a coworker, she agreed to attend a charity event in a nearby city, something she would normally refuse for fear of feeling out of place. Dressed simply, she moved among elegant conversations and calculated laughter, feeling like she didn't belong. Then she heard the name Daniel Walker announced on the stage, followed by long, almost reverent applause. When she looked up, the air seemed to vanish. He was there, confident, impeccable, surrounded by important people. The man from the Silent Nights had a powerful public face. He walked past her without recognizing her, without noticing her presence, and that public indifference cut through Sarah like a deep humiliation, more painful than any direct insult. She left before the tears came. In the dark parking lot, she felt shame mixed with anger and sadness. That night, she didn't answer the messages. On the other side, Daniel noticed the silence with a tightness in his chest that didn't match the control he had always held over everything. He didn't know he had been seen, but he felt that something had changed. The hours passed without a reply, and for the first time, the mistake of that initial message seemed to demand a real price. Between silent humiliations and hidden truths, the connection born of chance began to turn into a field of tension, where any misstep could expose everything, or destroy the little truth they had managed to build so far. The silence that followed was not empty, it was heavy. Sarah spent days trying to erase the feeling of having been invisible in front of someone who, in the late hours of the night, had made her feel unique. She kept going to work, answering customers, enduring the manager's curt remarks, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she no longer accepted that place automatically. It wasn't anger, it was awareness. The encounter at the event had shattered an illusion, but it had also revealed a truth. She deserved more than crumbs of attention, even when they came wrapped in beautiful words. When Daniel finally wrote, he didn't try to pretend everything was normal. He said he felt her silence as both a warning and a loss. He didn't ask for explanations. He simply confessed that he was afraid of continuing to lie, afraid of losing something he had never planned to feel. Sarah replied with a frankness that surprised even her. She told him she had seen him, recognized him even before hearing his name, and that his public indifference had hurt more than he could imagine. Daniel didn't defend himself. He admitted he had fled because, in that moment, he realized the abyss between who he was in real life and who he allowed himself to be with her. From then on, their conversations changed in tone. They stopped talking about who they might become and began talking about who they truly were. Daniel started sharing memories from his childhood before power, when money didn't yet dictate every move and affection didn't come attached to interests. Sarah spoke of small but sincere dreams, of how she had always wanted to be chosen without having to explain herself. Small gestures began to matter more than grand declarations. He started setting boundaries at work, turning down events he once accepted automatically. She began to stand her ground, responding to humiliations with calm firmness, like someone who had finally recognized her own worth. The bond deepened when they decided to meet away from stages and expectations. It was in a simple cafe on a cold morning where no one knew them. There were no promises, no justifications. Only sustained eye contact, comfortable silences, and a sense of mutual recognition. Daniel realized that there, without titles, he was just a man trying to be honest. Sarah realized she didn't need to make herself smaller to fit into that space. The transformation wasn't sudden, but it was clear. They were no longer the same people who had exchanged messages by mistake that early morning. Still, a greater truth was approaching, something Daniel had not yet fully revealed. Sarah sensed it in the subject changes, in the prolonged silences. And even so, she continued, not out of naivety, but because she now knew that the love being born didn't come from idealization, but from the conscious choice to remain vulnerable. The connection that once seemed like chance was beginning to solidify as a turning point, preparing them both for a revelation that would change everything, for better or forever. The truth didn't come in the form of an announcement, but as a decision Daniel could no longer postpone. He asked to see her that very night, not in a cafe or a neutral place, but where all masks would finally have to fall. When Sarah entered his apartment, she immediately felt the contrast between the immaculate space and the restless man waiting for her. The sweeping view of the illuminated city felt far removed from the tension filling the air. Daniel didn't offer a drink, didn't try to buy time. He said he needed to tell her everything before it became a lie greater than any he had ever lived. He began by talking about his father, about an inheritance received too early, about a responsibility imposed as destiny. He explained how the name Walker had ceased to be just a surname and had become a brand, a symbol that had to be protected at all costs. Then he revealed what he had always avoided saying. He wasn't just a successful executive, he was the direct heir to one of the largest financial conglomerates in the country, and that very week he was to be officially announced as the next CEO. The life Sarah had glimpsed at the event wasn't an exception, it was the rule. Every step he took was calculated, every relationship analyzed, every personal choice subordinated to public image. Sarah felt the impact like a sudden emptiness. It wasn't envy nor awe. It was the painful understanding that his world operated by a logic that would never naturally include her. Before she could react, Daniel continued. He confessed that the discreet relationship he maintained was part of that logic, sustained by strategic alliances, family expectations, and silent agreements. He said the mistaken message had happened on the night he decided he could no longer live that way. That talking to her had been the first time in years he felt he existed outside the role imposed on him. Then came the greater revelation, the one that changed everything. Daniel said he had refused the public announcement, confronted the board, broken agreements that sustained his power. He said he would rather lose the position than continue living a life he no longer recognized. The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah realized this wasn't a confession meant to impress her, but a real renunciation with irreversible consequences. He wasn't asking her to save him. He was offering the entire truth for the first time. Even so, nothing was resolved. With the mask gone, Sarah had to decide whether the love born from a mistake was strong enough to survive the fall that choice would bring. The revelation had changed everything, and whatever came next would demand more than feeling. It would demand courage. Sarah's decision was not immediate, because growth is also an act of love. She left that apartment carrying more than a revelation. She carried the awareness that she didn't need to rush to fit into any story that no longer respected who she had become. In the days that followed, she returned to work only to close a chapter. She resigned with the same calm with which she had always been ignored, but now there was firmness in her voice. It wasn't escape, it was choice. For the first time, she wasn't reacting to life, she was guiding her own steps. Daniel, in turn, faced the silent collapse of the world that had sustained him. Invitations vanished, headlines appeared, alliances unraveled. Even so, he slept better. The truth had been costly, but for the first time it no longer required him to hide in order to exist. When they met again, it was far from tall buildings and borrowed expectations. They walked together along a simple road, without exaggerated promises, only presence. They understood that the love born from a message sent by mistake was not a tale of salvation, but of recognition. Sarah didn't need to be elevated to be seen. Daniel didn't need to fall to be human. What united them wasn't the mistake itself, but the courage to listen to what that mistake revealed. They chose to move forward together with honesty, aware that true love doesn't erase differences, but creates a space where no one has to disappear for the other to exist. The moral of that story wasn't in the money lost, nor in the status abandoned, nor in the coincidence that began it all. It was in the message that crossed two lives at the exact moment both needed to be awakened. Sometimes destiny doesn't shout. It vibrates in your pocket, in silence, waiting for someone to have the courage to open the screen and read to the end. If this story spoke to you, if at any point you felt that message could have been yours too, confirm it in the comments. Say you received it. Say you felt it. Because stories are only completed when they find those who listen. And if you believe that love, empathy, and second chances can still change destinies, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any story, and share this with someone who might be waiting, without knowing it, for a message that changes everything.